So, Boker Tov. There are new pages here on the table. Okay. I'm just going to begin with source number 3 on the page, which actually is lifted out of last week's Parshat HaShavua 2 days ago. I'm sure we still remember Parshat Tazria. Parshat Tazria has 2 chapters, Yud Bet 12 and Yud Gimel 13, where the first parak has a whole 8 psukim, and the second has 59 psukim. It's a little bit imbalanced, but the 59 psukim are all about nega tzarat, leprosy, which connects to this week's parsha, which is Parshat Mitzorah. So the no, it's okay. We hear you. No, she's trying to arrange. She's trying to put the. No, she's not. She's trying to fix the. It's in the act of duty. It's in the line of duty. Yeah. It's not leprosy. That's the English translation in the King James Version. So it's some type of appearance in the skin, in the clothing, in the house. The Rambam tells us that in the clothing and in the house, so that's clearly miraculous. But he said that the nega tzarat of the skin was physiological. So however you want to describe it, but that's not my concern, because I'm not going to deal with the 59 psukim. I want to deal with the 8 psukim of Parshat Tazria, which talks about childbirth and the aftermath of childbirth in the halacha, where there are 2 significant pieces of information here. One has to do with korban yoledet, that after the birth of a child, the woman will bring a korban to Beit HaMikdash, and that's a shir in itself. What exactly is that korban? Most probably a blend of a korban todah, a thanksgiving offering, parallel to our saying gomel. And then there was a korban chatat, a sin offering, which defies explanation. There are explanations. Why in the world would a woman have to bring a korban chatat? But that's not the issue here. There are korbanot, and there's also tum'at leida. There's another speech here, and that is why is with boys it's 7 days, and with girls it's 14 days, and then there's a period of tahara. For boys it's 33 days, and for girls it's 66 days. Those are independent details. Everything is important, but that's not my concern right now. But there is this concept of tum'at leida, that there is blood, and that leads to some type of level of tumah that the woman will have to go through tahara at some point. Those are the 2 big parts of the story. Then there's a sideshow, and has to do with Brit Milah. Uviyam hashmini, on the 8th day, yimol b'sar olato. Now that's not big news, because if you remember Parshat Lech Lecha in Sefer Breshit, we heard about Brit Milah already. Yet every time the Torah repeats any particular mitzvah excuse me, that we may have heard already, so obviously they're add-ons, they're important information. So number 1, the Torah wants to stress that the 8th day. Now we know that sometimes a brit is made on the 9th day and the 25th day. It has something to do with the health of the baby. And if for whatever reason the doctors feel that it would be injurious to the baby's health to perform the brit on the 8th day, usually for premature babies, pagim, they won't do it on time. They'll wait till the baby has achieved a certain weight level, and that sometimes differs between doctor and moil and moil. But nevertheless, there is this idea. But also, there's a difference between milah bizmana and milah shelo bizmana. Milah on time and a brit milah that's delayed. Now, obviously, if there's a delay, Avraham Avinu had a delayed milah. He was 99 years old. So, okay, it's not the end of the world. But if there's a choice between doing it on the 8th day or doing it on the 11th day, because somebody's coming from Chutz La'aretz, some grandparent and wants to be there, will you postpone a brit just because? The answer is categorically not. In other words, there is a qualitative edge of doing Brit Milah. There's a new page here. The qualitative edge of doing the Brit on time. Milah Bizmana. Now, so much so that if it's on time, it defers Shabbat. So we know, we've been to Britot on Shabbat already. So Uviyom Hashmini, the Gemara says, Afilu b'Shabbat. Now that's not going to happen if it's a delayed Brit. So if the Brit is on the 9th day or on the 25th day, so you can't say, oh, Shabbos is a great day to do it. People are around. You can't do it. It has to be Milah Bizmana. So that's number one. Number two, Milah Bizmana, let's just postulate and say, not just postulate, but definitely point out that there are two ways that children come into this world. One is natural delivery, and one is through an intervention, a surgical intervention, which is a cesarean section, or known by the Mishnah as Yotzei Dofan. Now, the phrase Yotzei Dofan literally means coming out of the side, which means they made an incision in the abdomen of the woman on the side, and they took out the baby. That phrase, Yotzei Dofan, became an idiomatic expression in modern-day Hebrew, meaning anything highly unusual. Highly unusual. In one word, it's called charig, something that's very unusual. We'll say, Ze Yotzei Dofan. So people, a lot of times, they don't even know where the source is. It happens to be a Mishnah in Masechet Nida, Yotzei Dofan. So we have a Yotzei Dofan, a baby that comes out of the abdomen, which means it's not the normal way. So you have two different ways of babies coming into this world. And let me just digress for a second. There's a Mishnah in the 8th chapter of Masechet Bechorot that talks about how could there be two sons born in the same family and both are a firstborn? Well, one second. If there are two sons, one's going to be the second-born. And the Mishnah says there's a possibility where one is the Bechor for Pidyon Haben, and the other one is going to be a Bechor for Nachala, for inheritance, because the Bechor is supposed to receive two parts of the Yerusha. So so how could that be? So the Rambam tells us in his Mishnah commentary that we're talking about twins, where the first one is born by a cesarean section, and it comes out first, but the second one was born naturally. So if that happens, the first one is the firstborn for purposes of nachala, of inheritance, but is not the pet rechem. He's not the first one to come out of the rechem naturally, so there's no pidyon haben on the first one. But the second one was the pet rechem, so there would be a pidyon haben on the second one. But then the Rambam says, and the mother would die. Why would the mother die? Up until the 19th century, no woman survived a cesarean section. And the reason is because they didn't know how to control dimum, the excessive bleeding, and zihum, infection. They didn't know how to do it. So it could be she may have died a few days later, but she never survived. In the 19th century, where modern medicine began to understand how to deal with congealing blood, so they were able to deal with bleeding and deal with antibiotics, deal with infection. So in the late 19th century, people have survived, women have survived cesarean section. Today, cesarean section is just routine. It's just very routine. Not just routine, but once upon a time, when I was young, I remember I heard that if a woman had a cesarean section, they limited her to how many children she can have afterwards, or they said all subsequent births have to be cesarean section. And today, that's been put out to pasture. And a woman can have as many babies as she wants after cesarean section and naturally. And I have two, a daughter and a daughter-in-law from my family who passed the test, who both had cesareans for the first time and plenty of children afterwards naturally. So the Rambam, he's living in the 12th century, and he says there are some books that write that a woman can survive, can get pregnant, have a cesarean, and then get pregnant again. The Rambam says, I don't understand how that can happen. That woman's dead. You know, that I've never seen, he says, a pele. So Rav Kapach, in his addition to the Perush HaMishnah, he says, what was a pele, was a wonder to the Rambam, is ma'asim b'chol yom, is routine today. Today it's routine. But the Rambam, 800 years ago, it was a pele. How could you say something like that? So you have this difference between Yotzei Dofan, a cesarean. So the Yotzei Dofan cesarean causes 4 different changes in halacha. Number 1, there's no pidyon haben because it's not peta rechem. 2, if there's a cesarean on Shabbat, then the next Shabbat there's no brit. There's only a brit on Shabbat if it was a natural birth. That's 2. Number 3, there's no tumat leida. There's no tumah. Woman won't have to go to the mikveh afterwards. But this I will say with a little bit of caution. That's only if the cesarean was done before the birth process started. A lot of times, many times in the hospitals today, the doctors will opt for a cesarean when the birth process has already commenced, and then they see some type of complication. For example, the umbilical cord around the neck, so they'll intercede right away, because if they don't, they're going to have a baby that's not breathing. So they can do that. But then the birth process started already, and halachically, there is tumat leidah. But if there's a scenario where there's really no opening and no blood, no bleeding, so there's no tumat leidah whatsoever. And in the case of Beit HaMikdash, there's also no korban leidah after a cesarean. So, of course, you may say, because the woman's not going to be alive to bring the korban, but even today, where a woman would be a third Beit HaMikdash, the answer is there is no korban, and that becomes theologically important. So we see that there's a difference between a baby coming into this world naturally and a baby coming into this world in a side show. Do Yotze Doifan, yeah. So the 4 halachot: no Brit Milah on Shabbat after Yotze Doifan, no Pidyon Haben, no Tum'at Leida, Tum'ah, no Dam, and no Korban. So there's 4 halachot. There are 4 halachot that make a marked difference between this type of childbirth and that type of childbirth. Now, what does this have to do with Pesach, except for the fact that Tazria we read, before Pesach? So if we look at source number 2, our Chazal gave us 2 different schemes of how our redemption, Geula, is going to come about. Amar Rabbi Alexandri. What's a nice name to have, Alexander? Some people have that name, right? Alexander, I know. Middle name, Alexander. It was a name of some great Rebbe. There was a Rebbe from Alexander. The town was called Alexander. So he was called the Admor from Alexander. But the Alexander is a name. Amar Rabbi Alexandri. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Rami. Rami means he contrasted. It says in Yeshayahu, Perek Samach, Bi'ita. Let's just read the whole pasuk out loud. Ani Hashem bi'ita achishena. It's at the end of Yeshayahu Perek Samach. It's the end of the Haftarah for Parshat Ki Tavo. So we always read it at the end of the summer before Rosh Hashanah. And it means, I am God, Ani Hashem, Bi'ita, in its time, achishena, I will accelerate the process. And Chazal thought that this phrase, Bi'ita achishena, is what we call in literature an oxymoron. So what's an oxymoron? In my family, we always say, I know who the moron is, but who's the ox? Right? An oxymoron. So oxymoron is when you have 2 words that seem to mean contradictory ideas. They use one of the... Right, a wise fool, fine. Okay. Lambent darkness, one of the great English writers. Hopefully good is no. Oh, awfully good. I thought you said hopefully good. Awfully good. Right. So they have this concept of davar v'hipuchod, something and its opposite, and it's supposed to create. I think Simon and Garfunkel, the Sound of Silence. Sound of Silence. You can't get better than that. So here you have, in its time, I will accelerate. Well, let's 1 second. Is it going to be in its time? In its time means in a natural progression of events. Achishena means accelerated, stepping on the gas. So how can you have Be'ita Achishena? So Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says, it means if Am Yisrael is going to very quickly make a turnaround to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, big tshuva process, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu will push the step on the gas. Achishena, the whole process will be accelerated. If not, there's going to be Geula anyway, but it's going to be in a very natural progression of events. And that's called Bi'ita, with the word ayin taf, 8, in its time. It'll happen in its time. So the way it's normally understood is Bi'ita means natural Geula, and Achishena means supernatural. It's going to be miraculous and so on. So you have 2 possibilities, so much so that when the Rambam at the end of Hilchot Melachim, the very end of the Mishneh Torah, talks about 2 chapters of Mashiach time, he says, Lo yada adam ma yiyu achiyu. Nobody really knows how things are going to unfold. And therefore the Rambam believes, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Don't bet on one way, because you might be wrong. And he said, in the Nevi'im, we have different possibilities. So it's not that one's right and one's wrong, but the Nevi'im was suggesting it could be this way and it could be that way. So it could be, people say, there's no kibbutz goliyot of people, exiles coming to Eretz Yisrael before the building of Mashiach. And they'll prove it with a pasuk in Yeshayahu. But then you look at Yechezkel and you see just the opposite. So the Rambam says, don't put your eggs in one basket here. Don't bet on everything. Lo yada adam ma yu achayu. We don't know because there's no tradition. There's no ironclad tradition, right? Biden used that word a lot, ironclad. There's no ironclad tradition of how the Geula will unfold. Quite the contrary. Chazal spoke of multiple possibilities. Be'ita achishena. It could be this way. It could be that way. It could be natural. It could be supernatural. We'll have to see. I mean, we are in the driver's seat also to try to maybe pull ourselves together and create a achishena, a accelerated situation. But what I'm pointing out is our Chazal have used as an image of Geula childbirth. It's called Chevlei Mashiach. Now, many of us sing Zmirot. If you're a Litvak, you don't sing Zmirot. But if you're a Chassid, you sing Zmirot on Shabbos. Because, the Litvaks, they didn't produce great singers. They produced a lot of big Talmidei Chachamim. But I once heard Rabbi Lichtenstein, my great Rebbe, Zechron Lebracha, he quoted the Rav's brother, Rabbi Soloveitchik Zatzal, who quoted the Baal Tanya, the author of the Tanya, founder of Chabad, who said there are 3 levels of nigunim, of songs. One is a nigun with words. That's one level. A higher level of spirituality is a nigun without words. It's just a melody. And there's even a higher level, it's a nigun without a nigun. A melody without a melody. So I went over to Rav Aaron Lichtenstein. I said, I think I understand what a nigun without a nigun is. He said, what do you think it is? I said, it's a Litvische nigun. It's a I even got a half a laugh out of him. Says, I've never heard, wow, what a great Baal Tefillah for Rosh Hashanah, a Litvak. Never heard that in my life. But a Chasidisha, a Sanza, a Vishnitza, those are class A Chasidim. They say Mojitz, they sang the Nigunim in Poland and so on. So you have, so you sing Zmirot Friday night and Shabbat, Mechevlei Mashiach, Yutzalu Lirvacha. We will be freed and exempt and saved and spared from Chevlei Mashiach, the birth pangs of Yemot HaMashiach. So Chazal called it birth pangs. And it's not just the poet of the Zmirot. It's the Gemara. The Gemara says at various places that there are 3 different ways to be saved from Chevlo Shel Mashiach. It's a phrase that Chazal will use, which means they saw the emerging Geula, redemption, as a birth process. And if that's the case, then when Chazal say, Bi'ita achishena, in its time I will hasten it, there are 2 different possibilities of the birth process of the Geula. One is natural, and one is accelerated. If it's natural, so like in natural birth, what's going to come along for the ride is going to be a lot of pain, a lot of sacrifice, and a lot of blood. That's the price. It's going to happen. And if you just look at our last 130 years here in Eretz Yisrael, from the time of the end of the 19th century of the restoration of Yishuv in Eretz Yisrael until the establishment of the state and then the various wars, until this very day, there are korbanot, there's dam, there's pain. But we see it in the process of Geula. So people say, where's the Geula here? We're burying Har Herzl is full of korbanot. That's part of the Geula, of Bi'ita. But then there's a possibility of Achishena, of having a Geula process, of a birth process that's going to be Yoitze Dofan. And now I'm using the modern phrase, highly unusual and supernatural. And that will be painless, without blood, without sacrifice. I mean, that's something to look forward to. So this idea of having which is the real Geula. Remember there was a game, a TV game show in the States, I'm dating myself now, to tell the truth. And they would have a panel of people, will the real so-and-so please stand up? So will the real Geula please stand up? Are we looking at Bi'ita or looking at Achishena? What are we looking at? And I believe this is the contention of a machloket between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Loza ben Azariah. Let's go to source number 1. And now I'm going to move ourselves to Bnei Brak and the story of the Seder night in Bnei Brak. So we know the story. Those of us from Chutz La'aretz, which I think is most of us here, if not everybody, had 2 Sedorim in the Chutz La'aretz, so we know the story very, very well. Maaseh, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Akiva. Number 1, first source, on top of the page. The story of the 5 Chachamim, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Tarfon, Shayu Misubin b'Bnei Brak. They did the Seder. Misubin, they were reclining in Bnei Brak. Hayu Misaprim b'Tziat Mitzrayim, Kol Oto Alayla. They were discussing the Yetziat Mitzrayim the entire night. Ad shebo talmidehem v'amru lahem, until the students came and they said, Raboteinu, higia zman kriyat shema shacharit, it's already morning. So there's a historical import here. They couldn't see the window. I mean, what was the shades were closed, the trisim were closed. This has to do with the Bar Kokhba era, where in the Hadrianic persecutions, it was forbidden to perform mitzvot publicly. And that's why the Mishnah talks about blowing shofar in a pit, and so on, to just be out of sight. So here they had 2 students outside watching for Roman guards and sentries and police. So they whispered down. They said, "Okay, the Seder's over. It's already morning." But they downstairs in this dungeon didn't know that the Seder, that it was morning yet. So they had to be informed. This is the story. And why is it brought into the Haggadah? To teach us what we just said in the Haggadah, the more the merrier. The more you talk about Yetziat Mitzrayim on the night of the Seder, the better. And can you get an all-star list better than Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah and Rabbi Tarfon, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Eliezer, who sat the whole night? They didn't, break up at 1:30 in the morning, but they were there all night. That's really the story of Bnei Brak. Is that the story of Bnei Brak? Some claim that they were actually discussing whether to go for the Bar Kokhba revolution or not. That's what they were discussing, bringing us out of the Galut. And Rabbi Akiva believed that it's going to be a natural redemption. And as a natural redemption, we're going to have to fight our way out of the Roman bondage of sorts and rebuild Beit HaMikdash. We're going to have to do it. It's a human idea. And it's going to be costly. There'll be sacrifices on the way, and it's going to be painful, but we have to do it. And we'll see in a moment that Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, he thought that a Kadosh Baruch Hu is going to intervene, and there's going to be a very, very supernatural event that will bring about the Geula. What's the starting point of this discussion? Until what time can one eat the Korban Pesach on Seder night? Now, we don't have Korban Pesach. So we have a matzah afikomen in its place. So already you're saying midnight. Why do you say midnight? That's what you read. That's good. Okay, but that's only half the story. That's Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. He believes that the end point of eating Korban Pesach is midnight. But Rabbi Akiva argues, and he says you can eat the Korban Pesach until the morning, till the break of dawn. Achi aleh amud hashachar, break of dawn. Now that we'll see in a moment what the source for that is, but that's the machloket. As a corollary to that machloket, we know that if you're eating afikomen matzah to remember the Korban Pesach, if the halacha is like Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, then you got to get the matzah afikomen in before midnight. So what's midnight? Midnight's not 12 on the clock. It's half the distance between a sundown and sunrise in the morning. So I can already tell you it's 12:36 a.m. I looked it up. 12:36 a.m. on Seder night, next Monday night, is going to be Chatzot Laila. So you figured by then you'll get up to the Matzah of the Afikomen. The Ramah, Rabbi Yisrael says, Hallel can be after Chatzot. Chad Gadya can be after Chatzot. You don't have to close up the table at 12:36. You have to get to the Afikomen Matzah by 12:36. But not only is the Matzah Afikomen become an issue, but you remember in the 4 sons, right? Chacham, Rasha, Tam, and Sheino Yodea Lishol. So there, it brings us into the Medrash on Vigadata Levincha Bayomahu, Bavur Ze Asa Hashem Li B'Tzeitim Mitzrayim. Bavur Zes, it says, Yochol me Rosh Chodesh. Maybe from Rosh Chodesh Nisan, we're supposed to start talking about the mitzvah of Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim. No. Yochol me Rosh Chodesh? No. Talmud Lomar, Bayom Ahu, only on that day. Which is that day? The day that apparently they were bringing the Korban Pesach, which is Erev Pesach. No, says the Medrash. Yochol mebod yom Talmud lomar bavur zeh. It's because of this. B'sha'ah sheyesh matzah umaror munachim lefanecha. When there's matzah maror in front of you. When is there matzah maror in front of you? Seder night. Seder night. Now, just to be fair, the version of this Mishnah, of this Medrash rather, as it existed in the days of Beit HaMikdash before the destruction, was bavur zeh b'sha'ah sheyesh Pesach matzah umaror munachim lefanecha. And that version is actually preserved in some of the medieval Rishonim. They still have that version. B'sha'ah sheyesh Pesach matzah maror. So what do we see from there? Until what time do we have the unique mitzvah of Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim? Why do I emphasize unique? My gosh, there's a mitzvah the whole year to remember Mitzrayim. Laman tizkor et yom tzitcha me'eretz Mitzrayim kol yemei chayecha. And in the morning in Shema and the nighttime in Shema, we make a mention of Shema, of Yetziat Mitzrayim. Every Kiddush, Zeichel Yetziat Mitzrayim, we say it every time we make Kiddush, every Friday night, every Yom Tov. So Zeichel Yetziat Mitzrayim is a round-the-clock annual mitzvah. It's not an annual mitzvah, it's a daily mitzvah. And we'll see soon, day and night mitzvah. So we know about this mitzvah. Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim is something else. It's the mitzvah not to give a token mentioning to Yetziat Mitzrayim, but to elaborate about what happened. And that's only the night of the Seder. So now you have to define what is called the night of the Seder. So the answer is, it's measured by the mitzvah of eating the Korban Pesach. Okay, so now we know there's a machloket, there's a dispute. According to Rabbi and Azariah, eating the Korban Pesach is only till midnight. So the Seder, as we know it in terms of Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, what we call Magid, in the Haggadah Manishtana Avadamayinu, until the second cup, Gal Yisrael, that's linked to the Seder. And according to Rabbi and Azariah, the Seder is until Chatzot, and therefore the Seder effectively ends with eating the matzah of the Afrikaimen. That's until Chatzot, or in the days of Beit HaMikdash, eating the Korban Pesach. Rabbi Akiva says, no, you can eat Korban Pesach until the morning. You can't eat it during the morning, but until the morning, Ad Shialeh Amud HaShachar, until the break of dawn. So according to Rabbi Akiva, the Seder is until the morning, not until midnight. Not until midnight at all. Now, why did they sit in Bnei Brak kol oto halayla? Because Rabbi Akiva was the Rav of the place. How do I know that he was the Rav of the place? And they did it in accordance with his opinion. Because he sat b'haseva, yefeh mod. A Talmud, a student before his own primary Rebbe, because of kavod, should not sit leaning, reclining. And Rabbi Tarfon was Rabbi Akiva's Rebbe. But because the Seder, and Rabbi Tarfon's at the Seder, he's the fifth name of the five. But because this Seder took place in Bnei Brak, and Rabbi Akiva was the Mara Da'atra, was the Rav of the Makom, of the place, so he also sits B'Haseva. So they were all sitting Misubin B'Bnei Brak. It doesn't say Orchei Seder, they set up a Seder. It says they were Misubin. They were all Misubin in Bnei Brak. And because Rabbi Akiva was the Mara Da'atra, they kept that Seder going until the break of dawn. Achi Aleh Amud HaShachar. And the students had to just tell them when was the break of dawn. Now, who's also a participant? Who's one of the five? Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. He's the one who held against the Rabbi Akiva. He held that the Seder was only until midnight. So what do you think happened at midnight? When the clock struck 12, did the Snow White appear? What happened when the clock struck? Rabbi Akiva says, Chevra, Laila Tov, Ani Siyamti, Chas v'sholom. He wasn't going to do that. I mean, Rabbi Akiva sitting there, you're not going to get up and walk away. But he did say something. What did he say? Now, we are familiar in the Haggadah that after the section of the story, there is a quote from a Mishnah in Masechet Brachot. Amar Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Harei ani kiven 70 shana, I am like 70 years old, v'lo zachiti shete'amer Yetziat Mitzrayim ba'leilot, and I never was able to convince the Chachamim that we should make mention of Mitzrayim not only at the daytime, but also at nighttime. Now, when do we mention Yetziat Mitzrayim? In the third section of Shema, in the section of Tzitzis, Vayom Hashem. And it says, Ani Hashem Elokechem, asher hotzeiti etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim, liot lachem Elokim. Now, everybody said you had to say that third parsha of Shema in the morning. But there was a contention, and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah said, we should repeat it for Kriyat Shema at Ma'ariv too. Because what was done was they were only saying two parshiot at night, Shema and Vayam Shemoah. Until Uchta Leman Yebu Yemechem V'mei B'nechem Al Damash and Nishmat. But they didn't say Vayomer, they didn't say the parsha of Tzitzis. Why not? Because there's no Tzitzis at nighttime. So why do we have to say the mitzvah of Tzitzis at nighttime? Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah said, forget about the mitzvah of Tzitzis. There's Yetziat Mitzrayim. And we should be saying it at nighttime as well. And he says, I'm like 70 years old. There's a machloket between the Talmud Bavli and Talmud Yerushalmi. What did he mean by this? Did he mean I'm like 70, but I'm only 18 years old? Or, according to the Yerushalmi, I'm like any other 70-year-old, and I couldn't get it through. I'm an old man already. And people, but now I heard this great drasha from Ben Zayma, who said, Leman tizkor et yom tzitcha me'eretz Mitzrayim kol yemei chayecha hayamim, Kol Yemei Chayecha HaLeilot. Chachamim argued, and they said, no, Yemei Chayecha HaOlam Hazeh. Now, before the coming of Mashiach, we have to mention Mitzrayim. Kol Yemei Chayecha, even in Yemot HaMashiach, we're not going to forget about Mitzrayim. But Ben Zoma, who argues, says, when it comes to Yemot HaMashiach, Mitzrayim is going to be small potatoes. Who's going to mention it? There's going to be greater things to talk about when the Mashiach comes. So we're not even going to mention the idea of Yetziat Mitzrayim. So there, the Rabbi Ben Zoma says, what is Kol Yemei Chayecha? It means nighttime. And Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah convinces the Chachamim to go along with this drasha. And that's why Rabbi Yehuda Nasi in the Mishnah puts it into the end of the first chapter of Masechet Brachot. Maskirim Yetziat Mitzrayim Baleilot. We mention Yetziat Mitzrayim even at nighttime. Omer Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah Reinik Even Shevim Shana. Most people, and I'm talking about 99.9% of the people, if given the question, if you have two sources, you have a Mishnah and you have the story as found in the Haggadah after the Sipur of Bnei Brak. Where is the source and where is the transfer? Anytime you have a parallel in Chazal, it's always wise to know where is the source. Is the source the Mishnah and then it was moved over, was cut and pasted grafted onto the Haggadah? Or is the story in the Haggadah somehow, we have to answer what that means, what is the Haggadah, and it was transferred to the Mishnah. If that's the case, then the source is a very old source. Very old source. Now we know that the Haggadah is a compilation of sources. There's a whole medrash on Aram Erovi Ravi Vayerid Mitzrayim Aviyago Sham B'Mtei that we say in the Haggadah. That means that when they put the Haggadah together, they took a medrash, lock, stock, and barrel, and put it into the Haggadah. That's what it means. Or Manishtana. They took the Manishtana from the Mishnah and incorporated it into the Haggadah. Now, the story of Bnei Brak, of Rabbi Akiva and the other four Chachamim, was a medrash. And it was incorporated into the Haggadah. Where does that story end? So most people think, when the students came and they said, knocked on the door, it's morning, Seder time is over. Most people think that's where it is. And then they go on to the next paragraph. And the next paragraph, as it's printed in the Haggadot, is Amar Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Harei Ani Kiven Shevim Shana. And then people ask the question, what in the world is this Mishnah doing here? It has nothing to do with Seder night. It has to do with Zchirat Yetziat Mitzrayim, remembering Mitzrayim, a token remembrance of Mitzrayim, whether you have to do it once a day or twice a day. Is it a once a day multiple vitamin or twice a day vitamin? That's nothing to do with Pesach. And there are a zillion answers to that question. But when we see it in the context of the way I printed it here, from the Rambam's Haggadah, we'll understand that Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah said what he said. I am now like 70 years old. He said it at the Seder of Rabbi Akiva in Bnei Brak. And how do I know that? Because look how it says in the fourth line in source number 1. And it's emphasized and underlined. Amar lahem Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. In all of your Haggadot, the word lahem does not appear. It just says, Omer Reb Elazar ben Azariah, and it's the next paragraph. The printer's printed it as the next paragraph, and once you see a new paragraph, what goes into your head? It's something new. Oh, I know this Mishnah from Masechet Brachot, and it was brought over. But when you read it in the Rambam, it's not a new paragraph. It's Amar Lahem Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah said to them. To whom? To Rabbi Akiva, to Rabbi Tarfon, to Rabbi Yeshua. And what did he say? Hareini kiven shivim shana v'lo zachiti sheteyamer yitziat Mitzrayim baleilot ad shedorsha ben zoma shenemar leman tizkot yon sitcha miyatzrayim kol yemei chayecha hayamim kol yemei chayecha haleilot. Chachamim argue. And by the way, Chachamim argue, that's in the Mishnah. But in the manuscripts of the Haggadah Shel Pesach, it's not there. It's not there because it's not relevant. All we're interested is Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah quoting the drasha of Ben Zoma that you have to say this third parsha of Shema at nighttime. Why is Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah speaking up at Rabbi Akiva's Seder and teaching us this halacha? Because it came midnight. And Rabbi Akiva is continuing with the Seder because he believes that you eat Korban Pesach the whole night and hence you have Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim the whole night. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah argues and says that the Seder has now come to an end because at Chatzot, at midnight, there's no more Korban Pesach and therefore there's no more Seder, there's no more Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim. But, says Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, I'm not walking out. I'm going to continue sitting here and talking about Mitzrayim with you. But I've now moved to a different category of a mitzvah. I am no longer in the category of the mitzvah of Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, the unique mitzvah that applies only for Seder night, in the time framework of eating Korban Pesach, but I'm now in the every night mode. Every night mode, I believe that you're supposed to make mention of Yetziat Mitzrayim. So normally we fulfill that in about 30 seconds by saying the third parsha of Shema. Tonight, I'm going to fulfill it in 5 hours. I'm going to sit with you from midnight until 5 in the morning. What's the difference? There's no maximum on this, but you should understand that it's not because of Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, but it's because Zechirat Yetziat Mitzrayim. It's the every night mitzvah that I believe, and I'm in conformity with Rabben Zoma's drasha, Yemei Chayecha Hayamim, Kol Yemei Chayecha Halelot. That this story of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is part and parcel of the story of the Seder in Bnei Brak with Rabbi Akiva. And that's exactly where it was said. And then Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, editing the Mishnah, has this story of Bnei Brak. Why shouldn't he have it? He's a student of Rabbi Meir, who's a student of Rabbi Akiva. So he had this medrash, and he lifts out of context the part of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, and he puts it in, grafts it onto the Mishnah of the end of the first chapter of Masechet Brachot. Maskirim Yetziat Mitzrayim Baleilot, Omer Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. So there, in all of our Mishnayot, the word lahem has been deleted because it's not relevant. It's not he's not talking to anybody. It's just Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah once upon a time said. Who cares when? In the Mishnah. But in the Haggadah, which is the source of this story, it's Amar Lahem Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. So much so that in the Talmud Yerushalmi version of the Mishnah, the word Lahem actually still appears, which means the transfer from the story of Bnei Brak to the Mishnah was done without any deletions. But in the Mishnah, as it appears in the Talmud Bavli, the word Lahem was actually deleted. Okay, so that's the story of two different possibilities of Geula. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah believed that the birth process of Geula is going to be miraculous, and it's going to be cut in the middle of the night, Vahi b'chatzi halayla. And Rabbi Akiva said it's going to be a natural process. We're going to have to go through the whole night of the galut, of the exile, and arrive gradually at the morning. There's even an interesting medrash based on a pasuk in Shira Shira, Mizot hanishkafa kamo shachar, something like the morning. So there were two Tanaim walking on the Arbel mountain, which overlooks Tveria. And you know that the Chachmei Eretz Yisrael in the days of the Talmud Yerushalmi were not in Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim was, unfortunately, I hate to use the word from the Shoah, Judenrein, free of Jews. It was the Romans built Capitolonia, a temple, a temple on the place of, this is before the Muslims took it over. There was a temple there. It was called Aliyah Capitolonia, and there were no Jews there. So where were the Jewish communities in Eretz Yisrael at the time? In the Galil. And it's really the lower Galil primarily, but also the upper Galil, from the coast, Caesarea, to Tzipori, to Tveria. It's route, there's one kvish, now it's Route 77 and connects to Route 25. But that's Route 65 rather. So that's me from Caesarea, Tzipori to Tveria. So overlooking Tveria, you have the Arbel Mountains. And one of the Tanaim said to the other, as they were walking in the end of the night, take a look how the night comes to an end. There's the Ayelet HaShachar, which is known as the morning star. A star that appears at the end of the night. And then comes the break of dawn, and then comes sunrise. She says, you see that the way the night exits into, or transforms into the day, is gradual. There are different stages. Kach tiyeh gulat am Yisrael. That's the way the redemption is going to be. Kim'a kim'a, step by step, gradual. And that's the way Rabbi Akiva saw it. Rabbi Akiva saw it as a gradual progression of events, bi'ita, in its time. And Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah saw it as an intervention. And he saw it more in terms of Vahi b'chatzi alayla, middle of the night, Kadosh Baruch Hu is going to, all of a sudden, middle of the galut, as if to say, Kadosh Baruch Hu is going to cause it to immediately stop. Okay, so what's the halacha in this great machloket between Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah and Rabbi Akiva? So we'll say, for starters, if you look at source number 16 on the 17 on the second page, do you all have source number 17? It's a Tosfot. Do I have most pages you should have it. The last source. Right, so Tosfot there actually tells us, Tosfot actually tells us that the halacha is like Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Mikol makom nireh halacha ke Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Which means that the Korban Pesach would have to be eaten until midnight, which means that matzah of Afikomen had to be until midnight, which means effectively the Seder is until midnight. And that view became adopted by Ashkenazim. That's why the Ramah, Moshe Isserles, brings it. But he puts in an add-on, he says, you know what, the Hallel can go beyond. But when we talk about the Seder, we're talking about the Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, the Magid, the core of the Haggadah, the eating matzah maror, eating the Afikomen. So that should be, you got to get that done before Chatzot Laila. And I say again, it's 12:36 a.m. This next Monday night. What happens with the Rambam? The Rambam, don't worry about that. The Rambam always makes trouble for us, right? I have one of my great teachers at Yeshiva University, Professor Feldblum, Zichrono Livracha, don't worry, they're taking care of it, who said, if the Rambam wouldn't have had stumbling blocks in the book, nobody would have learned it. Nobody would have read it. Somebody opened the door or something, whatever. It's an emergency. Huh? There's no emergency, don't worry. Nothing to be alarmed about. So the Rambam has all kinds of stumbling blocks, like contradictions, like irregularities, and changes of mind. And you've heard this from me often enough. The Rambam, in his Mishnah commentary, first draft, and for those who haven't heard this from me before, I'm just going to repeat. Rambam writes his Mishnah commentary when he's 23 years old, and it takes him 7 years to write it. He's writing it under very, very difficult conditions, in travel, in transit. Rambam was born in Cordova, Spain. At age 13, he and his family, they flee Spain for North Africa. They get to Morocco, Fez. From there, they start traveling again, and they make it all the way to Eretz Yisrael. Now, the El Al nonstop from Barcelona wasn't flying that day. So it took years to make that trip. And each time you get to a station, you stay there for a year or two or three. And they get on a boat. And everything was a local, the one port to the next port to the next port. He makes it to Eretz Yisrael, and he's almost 30 years old, but they only stay here for less than a half a year. And then he backtracks to Egypt. and he makes it to Alexandria. And then from Alexandria, he goes south to Old Cairo, which is called Fostat. We even know the shul, one of the shuls that the Rambam seemed to have gone to, it still exists today, the old shul of Cairo. Fine, and the Rambam then, age 30, he dies at age 66. Most of his adult life is on Egyptian soil. That's where he writes his Mishnah commentary in relative tranquility. And he has sources available. When the Rambam writes his Mishnah commentary early on, in transit, he didn't have a laptop. He didn't have a disk on key with all the sources. He's writing from memory. And even the great Rambam is going to make changes when he hits Egyptian soil. And there are multiple changes between the way he writes the halacha in his Mishnah commentary as the way he does later on in the Mishnah Torah. And what I've done in my works, in my books, I've systematized all these things. Fine. One of the changes has to do with the Rambam Psak Halacha on this machloket, this dispute between Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah and Rabbi Akiva. In his early writings, he went along with Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. And the reason, I have some reasons for it. I don't want to bore you with all the details, but there's a whole slew of anonymous Mishnayot that seem to indicate that that's the halacha. For example, the most popular is found in the Seder, because before you start Pesukei de Zimra, there's still some people who say the Korbanot in the Seder after Birkot HaShachar, and one of the sections of Korbanot is the 5th chapter of Masechet Zvachim, Ezo Mekoman Shel Zvachim. And there, one of the Mishnayot talks about Korban Pesach. HaPesach eino ne'echal ela ad chatzot. No dispute there. It just says Korban Pesach until midnight. That's it, undisputed. And at the end of Masechet Pesachim, it says that the Korban Pesach after midnight becomes notar. Notar means it's leftover and you can't eat it. It's not like my house. Sunday night is leftover, Monday night is leftover, Tuesday night is leftover. You know, there was a great chazan, Pierre Pinchik. Some of you may have heard the name. And he had a great piece on Raza de Shabbos, which only Nusach Sfard says instead of Bamem Madlikin, Friday night. Raza de Shabbos. And he gave a concert. My father Shalom told me this. He gave a concert on a Tuesday night. He did everything in his repertoire except Raza de Shabbos. And everybody came to hear that. And they started yelling as an encore, Raza de Shabbos, Raza de Shabbos. And Pinchik says, did you ever eat cholent on Tuesday? Well, I could tell him that I did. But you know what? Cholent on Tuesday does not taste like cholent on Shabbos. Cholent what? You know, yeah, that's only from Friday night to Shabbos morning. Cholent on Tuesday or Wednesday is alte Zachin, and it goes in this. It was good last night? Okay. Okay, so you went to Bar Mitzvah, fine, okay. So you had cholent?
It was fresh.
It was fresh, okay. But normally cholent, if you eat it in a weekday, it's because it was leftover. So leftovers in the kitchen, you can eat, that's okay. But leftover in Beit HaMikdash, you can't. If anything was left over from the time framework of eating a korban, it had to be burnt. Fine. So you couldn't eat the Korban Pesach, according to Rabbi Akiva, in the morning. Once the morning broke, that's it. But according to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, after midnight, chatzot. So the Mishnah says, HaPesach notar achrei chatzot, metamei yadayim. So you can't. Fine. So you see there are Mishnayot that actually reflect the opinion of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. This impacted on young Rambam. Young Rambam went along with what's called Stam Mishnah, the anonymous Mishnah, and that was the halacha. But things happened in the Gemara that caused the Rambam to rethink his position. And he says, you know, what's going on in the Gemara? They're identifying these anonymous Mishnayot as a single opinion. It's called a Shitat Yachid, in accordance with Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, implying that everybody else is against it. You know, this Mishnah, that's Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, but everybody else actually argues. And who's the everybody else? The Chachamim. And the Chachamim, the big name is Rabbi Akiva. So Rambam changes his mind. He changes his mind. He says, the halacha is you can eat the Korban Pesach the whole night. But the Chachamim said, Kedei laharchik et ha'adam min avera. Just to train yourself, don't get used to eating the Korban Pesach in the second half of the night. Get used to finishing it until midnight. Now, that means midrabanan, rabbinically speaking, there's a time factor until chatzot. But if you missed it, you can still eat the Korban Pesach. And it's the identical idea of Kriyat Shema at nighttime. The Mishnah says, Chachamim omrim at chatzot, that Kriyat Shema at night should be until midnight. And Rabbi Gamliel says in the Mishnah, until break of dawn, Achi aleh amud hashachar. And then the Mishnah says that even Chachamim believe that it's till the break of dawn, except that laharchik et adam and avera, just to prevent. Person goes to sleep at 10 o'clock and says, I have time to read Shema and everything. Then he's going to overshoot. He's going to sleep through it. And therefore, just get used to saying Shema at night before midnight. So you'll be on the safe side. And the Rambam says the same thing with regard to Korban Pesach. Just be safe, be on the safe side to eat the Korban Pesach kol halayla. So do it until chatzot, till midnight, so you don't overshoot it. But if you overshot it, you can eat it kol halayla. And that's why the Rambam believes that the Seder, in terms of talking about Yetziat Mitzrayim, is like Rabbi Akiva, kol halayla. So you have this machloket and this change in the Rambam. So in Shulchan Aruch, Rabbi Yosef Karo, the Sfardi, adopts the Rambam's opinion that you can have the Seder the whole night. But the Ramah, who accepts the Tosfot opinion, he says that you should be careful until Chatzot Laila. But he makes this little idea. He says, by the way, Hallel and the other stuff, that can be after. You don't have to be careful about Chatzot midnight for the extras that go on afterwards. Do you remember one of the poems that we say at the end, towards the end, Chad Gadya, before Chad Gadya, Echad Miyadeya? Before Echad Miyadeya, we have two poems that, there's Adirhu, Yivne Beito, and then there's Vahi B'chatzi Alayla, and Va'amartem Zeva Pesach. Now in Chutz La'aretz, they split it. The first night we said Vahi B'chatzi Alayla, and the second night we said the second poem. But here in Israel, we don't have two Sedarim, so we say both, on the night of the Seder. In Vahi B'chatzi Halayla, you have to really, really get a good translation and somebody who's going to explain to you. It's a walk along. The poet takes you through Tanakh, every important event that happened at midnight. So obviously the first important event is going to be Makat Bechorot. When did the Bechorim of Mitzrayim die? Vahi B'chatzi Halayla. And it was B'diuk, exactly midnight. Vashem Hika Kol Bechor. God smite all the Bechorim. And that was that was the end. That's when Paroi came out in his pajamas, just like we had Motzei Shabbos at 2 a.m. We had a pajama party in the Miklat. For those of you who didn't hear the siren and just slept through it, Ashrechem. There you go. Never heard it. There was plenty left. First of all, there was a boom and there were two booms, right? And then there was in my siren. So in my house, we have 16 apartments. So everybody came down, and it was with little kinderlich and babies and everything. I'm telling you, it was a pajama party, including the adults, because now's not the time for a fashion show. Although there were people like my wife who considered the real option that there's going to be a siren. So at least to wear a sweater, to have a hat available to put on. But there were some women who didn't even get that far. Nothing was Chalila tzniut compromised in any way or manner. But, you normally don't see some of the neighbors like that in their pajamas, So I called it a pajama party, that's all. So Paroi, that's how we were taught as kids. Vahi b'chatzi halayla, and then Paroi ran in his pajamas to Moshe Rabbeinu, out of here, fast. And Moshe Rabbeinu says, so we got time, we have to pack, we have to ask the neighbors, for belongings. And Paroi is pushing. So that's the first Vahi b'chatzi halayla, but then the poem goes on to other episodes in Tanakh that happened exactly at midnight. The last one is really beautiful. Karev Yom Asher Lo Yom Velo Laila. That the day should come quickly. Which day? The day that is neither day nor night. That's a very funny expression. But it comes out of Zechariah Perek Yud Dalet, where that phrase comes from. the Kadosh Baruch Hu talks of the end of days, the most famous pasuk in the Chumash, V'haya Hashem lemelech al kol haaretz, bayom hahu yeh Hashem echad u'shmo echad. That's there. In Zechariah Perek Yudalid, we read it for Haftarah, first day of Sukkot. And there it talks about the day which will be neither day nor night. What does that mean? So the Paitan, the poet, explains. He says, Ta'ir b'ke'or yom cheshkat laila. God should illuminate the darkness of the night in a beautiful fashion of light. What does that mean? That this is an expression of Vahi b'chtzei halayla, and it will be at midnight. Am Yisrael is going to be in the thick of the galut, and all of a sudden, the lights are going to go on. The Geula is just going to happen. This is the Achishena, the accelerated, as the poet hopes that would happen. Not waited out, Be'ita in its time, but it's going to be accelerated. Mamash, Vahi b'chtzei halayla. And this is an unbelievable expression of faith. Karev yom asher yom v'lo laila. Ta'ir yom cheshkat laila. In the midst of the darkness of the night, it's going to be a bright light. And this is an interesting thing, because we know that Hallel we only say in the daytime. There's only a mitzvah of saying Hallel in the daytime. All the Chagim, we say it after Shacharit in the daytime. The only exception to saying Hallel at nighttime is Seder night. It's the only time that we have Hallel. So the Rav Zichron Bracha said, it's not that we're saying Hallel at nighttime, but by Chtzei Halayla is daytime. It's the moment where the middle of the night will be transformed to Or Gadol, great light, and that's why we say Hallel at night, because the nighttime has become daytime. When? Vahi b'chatzi halayla, at midnight. And this is what Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was all about. I'm just going to end with a drash that my son, Eitan, so what? So he's an El Al pilot, and I show off about him. So what? He's also a darshan, and he said a great drasha. He says, Ani Hashem bi'ita achishena. So I spelled it out for you. Ayin taf, which means 8, which means a time. Itim, which means time. He says you can read it also with a tet. And you know what bi'ita with a tet means? It means a kick. He says, Ani Hashem, God says, when Am Yisrael is going to get a kick in the pants, then Achishena, then things are going to start rolling and start moving. Exactly what's happening in the world now. Am Yisrael in Chutz La'aretz, those who haven't had the schut of being here, are getting a kick in the pants. And everybody's getting jolted. Bi'ita means getting jolted. And hopefully HaKadosh Baruch Hu will accelerate the whole process. Bi'ita, if we need such a kick in the pants with a tet, as my son Eitan said, Achishena, it should be quickly and so on. Let me wish you, each and every one of you, Chag Kasher v'Sameach. Kasher it's going to be with 3 hashkachos for Pesach on Economica, on bleach. You can rest assured, but don't drink the bleach. Do me a favor. Don't drink it. Even though you'll have real clean insides, but do not drink the bleach. And hashkachos on things that you don't know what hashkachos for. So my father, Shalom, said, what are you starting up with the mashkichim? They're making a living. It's parnasa. They have to make a living. Okay, so let them all make a living. The next year that I will be here for is going to be May 20th.